This is a 1912 Ford Model T touring car. Beautiful, isn't it? My Uncle Golden used to drive a car a lot like this. J. Golden Kimball was not only my uncle, he was a frontier cowboy who became an LDS General Authority. He was a unique character in the Mormon Church around the turn of the century and was loved and admired for his rare wit. But sometimes Uncle Golden got in a lot of hot water with church leaders for his frank and humorous way of telling the truth. But nevertheless, the people loved him for his colorful spontaneity. He spent a lot of time on the road talking to church members, and nowhere was he more loved than in rural Utah. Why don't we see if we can get this started? I got it. I'm Jim Kimball, and for the next hour or so, I'll be traveling around the state of Utah, performing newly found J. Golden Kimball stories and talking with people who remember Uncle Golden and have stories to share. So join me as I go on the road with J. Golden Kimball.
Local production of On the Road with J. Golden Kimball is made possible by a generous grant from the George S. and Dolores Doré Eccles Foundation.
Golden was happiest when he was out here on the road, on assignment. He was back to his roots, back to the people he knew and loved, the ranchers, the farmers, the cowboys. I think he preferred to go north up to his home in Round Valley and be with his friends and spend some time fishing on Bear Lake. Our first stop is in Logan, where my friends Jim and Linda Kemp are graciously hosting a performance in their backyard. I'll tell you one about Logan. Golden, he lived here, and 4 of his 6 children were born here in Logan. And years later, someone asked him, "What's it like to live in Logan? You want to hear this story, or are you going to get a little upset?" And he said, "Well, I rather enjoyed it." They said, "Well, Logan doesn't seem to grow very much. It just sits there. It just is about the same population it's been for the last 20 years. And he says, "Yeah, I'm aware of that." And they said, "Well, what do you think the problem is?" And he says, "Well, let me think about it. I guess the problem is that every time a young unwed sister gets pregnant, some young man leaves town." Story that took place just north of here in Wyoming. See, Golden was constantly being berated by President Grant and others for his swearing and for these stories. And President Grant called him in and kind of gave him the ultimatum. He says, "If you continue with this," he said, "I'm really going to have to close you down, and you're going to have to travel with me or Rutger." And he said, "So I'm just forewarning you. And see, Golden always said, well, he says, it's that damn contraption, the telephone, that gets me in trouble, because before it was invented, I could go out and say anything I wanted to, and then I'd get back and deny it. But now they call back and tell Heber what I've said, and he's waiting for me at the train station." And so this is exactly what happened. He went up to Wyoming and got carried away, speaking to people up there, and he said some things I guess he shouldn't have said. And when he got back, Heber J. Grant called him in, and he says, "I've warned you, I've told you, and now I got this phone call, and you cursed these people, you cussed at them, and we can't have that. And so I'm sorry, but you're traveling with me from now." "Oh, wait a minute, Heber, wait a minute. Now, just a minute. That's Wyoming. You got to remember that's Wyoming. And it's pretty bleak up there. It's pretty drab. And life is tough. And the winters are long. And life is hard. And Heber, I'm telling you, if you don't, when you stand up to speak to them, call them sons of bitches, they don't hardly feel welcome. J. Lee May and his wife, Anna, traveled all the way from Rockland, Idaho to join us at the Bluebird restaurant in Logan. He told me a J. Golden Kimball story he remembered as a young man.
My wife and I are the only two people left that can tell this story. All the rest of them, so far as we know, have gone beyond the veil.
And what year was that?
That was, I would imagine, about 1926. 25 or 26. And the Pocatello Stake held a stake conference, a quarterly conference in Rockland one time in the year, and that was in the month of June. And it had been noised around that J. Golden Kimball would be at the conference. And naturally, the building began to fill with people. They stacked themselves in there, and every seat was taken, and they were sitting in the aisles and in the window wells. And after the opening exercises were over, and some other remarks made, finally it was announced that J. Golden Kimball would speak. And as a teenager sitting down in the audience, I thought he would never quit standing up. He just kept getting taller and taller and taller. And in my youthful mind's eye, I could envision somebody holding a grasshopper up like this, and his little beady eyes, and his wrinkles in his vest, and his 2 watch change with going down into his watch pockets. And he didn't say anything. He looked out across that audience for a few minutes, and he says in his high-pitched voice, "So this is Rockland, is it? How in the hell did you find the God-forsaken place?" And my Uncle Andrew was a bishop, and he was his shoulders are going up and down like this, and Aunt Laura, a little English gal, sitting down, her face was, she didn't know what to think about his opening remarks. And when people got through chuckling, he says, "And last night I stayed with your bishop, and here's the home that he stayed in, up on the bench, about 1.5 miles from the church. And this morning," he said, "I needed a toilet, and I needed it bad. Bishop, where do you go?" "Oh," he says, you go down through the orchard about 100 yards. You'll see the place. Hell, you need to pack a lunch," he said.
Did the audience roar?
Yeah, they roared then. And George Udy never did go to church. He was a member, but we couldn't get him into the building. And he was rolling in the aisle with laughter. He was just really beside himself.
One sister called on the phone and said, "My mother loved your Uncle Golden so much because as the wife of the stake president, he would often come to Logan, and we so loved to have him because in those days the general authorities stayed with the members in their homes and ate at their table and got to know the kids, and Golden came. This time he was not feeling very well. When he arrived, she said he was very ill, and he just said, "Sister, I just need to go to bed tonight, and maybe I'll be ready in the morning for the meetings." And so they took him upstairs and put him immediately to bed. And the next morning, it was getting close to meeting time. And so she said, my mother went up and she fixed a little toast. And she walked in and she had some tea. And she walked in and she says, "Brother Kimball, you better be getting up. It's time to get dressed and get ready. And I fixed a little watered down tea for you to drink. And maybe it'll make you feel a little bit better." He reared up in bed, rested on his elbow, and he says, "Watered down tea?" He says, "Hell, if I'm going to break the word of wisdom, you may as well make it full strength." Well, the problem is that a lot of people, I'm telling you all these witty and humorous stories, there is something to Golden that I often don't mention, but I think it is appropriate that you understand that he had a very compassionate, loving, and tender heart. too. And a lot of people have told me stories about things that he did that are just, to me, endearing, because it gives us a different dimension to his personality. Steve Smoot told me this story. He said that his Aunt Peggy, who had never married, but had a delightful wit about her and saw life as a great experience, a great celebration. And she told this wonderful story. She says, somebody said, well, do you remember Uncle Golden Kimball? A lot of people just call him Uncle Golden, even though he was not related to him. And she says, oh yes, she says, I just loved the man. He was just always so sweet to me and so kind to me. And she says he was particularly tender on one occasion when I went to a Christmas party. And we all went together and we picked him up on 2nd Avenue, on 2nd North where he lived. And we took him with us in this car and we went to this Christmas party. And she said, oftentimes I was kidded a great deal about the fact that I had never married. And she says, sometimes I could handle it really well and other times I couldn't. And she said, this night they were all kidding me about, on the first morning of the resurrection, what are you going to do, Peggy? No one will be there for you. And she says it really got a little hard. But she said, Golden was your Uncle Golden was there, and she said he didn't say anything. He didn't enter into this, and she said he just gave me a look like he didn't think this was right. And so she said when the party was over, and when we left and we all got back in the car, we drove him home first because he was very tired, and we let him out at his home, and he got out and said goodbye to everyone, and then he started down his driveway, and then he turned around and came back to the car and said, just a minute. And he tapped on my window. And she says, I rolled down my window. And he said to me, Peggy, on that resurrection morning, don't you worry, I'll be there for you. Isn't that sweet? She says, I always remembered that. Uncle Golden always liked to keep track, especially down Highway 89, of the membership. He tried to show up and speak at baptisms or participate in baptisms. It was a very big thing, membership growth. And periodically when he would go back, he would inquire how some person was doing. And when he got back down to southern Utah, in Salina, he went to this bishopric meeting, and he said, I'm curious to know about Brother Nichols. Whatever happened to Brother Nichols? And the bishop said, well, I'm sorry to tell you this, Brother Kimball, but he's fallen back into his old ways. You remember we brought him around, he was chasing women and drinking and smoking, and then he had a change of heart. We thought he did, and then he was baptized, and now he's fallen back into those old ways. And Golden said, well, I'm sorry to hear that. Who baptized him? Who was it that baptized him? And they said, well, Brother Kimball, you did. You were the one who baptized him. He said, I did? And he says, yeah, you did. He says, well, I'm really sorry about that. And they said, well, Brother Kimball, it's not your fault that he's fallen away. And he says, well, that's not what I'm sorry about. I'm sorry I didn't keep the son of a bitch under the water longer. Tell me, Lorraine, have you ever had a manicure before?
No, this is the first one.
First one?
My hands are 79 years old.
Hands are 79 years old. Well, that face looks like it's only about 27 years old.
You're a real kidder.
Well, why don't you tell me that story that you said your mother passed on to you when you were a young woman?
Well, we lived out in Wanship, and you know where that is,
yes,
don't you?
Yes.
And she told me that when Brother J. Golden Kimball was going to be the visiting authority for state conference, they had to go down to Coville to the beautiful old steakhouse. They had to go early to get a seat. And she said at that time, for women to use makeup was frowned on. And so someone asked him what he thought about that, and he said, well, a little paint never hurt any old barn.
And so that was the end of the discussion. I mean,
Yeah. Well, we all laughed.
we all laughed. What about the other story? You just told me a minute ago that your mother passed on to you.
Well, she told me that because of Brother Golden's cowboy vocabulary, that authorities wouldn't let him speak for a while.
Uh-huh.
And so finally, when they did let him, they asked him to pray, and she said he prayed for about a half hour.
To get even. I love that. Yeah, he said his cowboy vocabulary were just leftovers from his cowboy
Yeah.
days. He said they came from a far larger vocabulary.
Well, if you lived out in the country, you knew about that.
Oh, yeah. He says the only language animals understood. He said they never would respond to you unless you swore at them.
No.
The thing I need to explain to you is Uncle Golden drank coffee as a cowboy. I think most cowboys drink coffee, if the truth were known. It's breakfast for them. And that's it. Gets them awake, gets them on the horse and out with the cattle. And Golden wrestled with it, and when Heber J. Grant said, we're going to observe the word of wisdom, the 89th section is now going to be enforced, he went to him and says, Heber, you can't do this to me. I've been drinking coffee all my life. What am I supposed to do? And he says, well, try your best, Brother Kimball. Try your very best to give it up. And the year before he died, he gave a conference talk, and he says, I want you, brothers and sisters, to know that I observe the word of wisdom. I still have a little bit of a problem, but I've just about got it licked. 85 years old, and he's just about got it licked. So anyway, he goes into, he'd go down early to, this one incident took place in Keeley's, and he went down early. As soon as the door opened, he went in, because his wife wouldn't serve him coffee, and he walked down. He just lived up on 2nd North, a block and a half away from East South Temple. He goes in and he says, may I have a cup of coffee, please? And so they bring it to him. He sits in the back booth. And he's sipping this coffee. And a woman comes in and goes by him to the ladies' room and then comes back and pauses and looks at him, and she says, aren't you J. Golden Kimball of the First Council of 70 drinking coffee? And he looked up at her and he says, sister, you're the third woman today to mistaken me for that old son of a bitch. Now, if that isn't quick, I don't know. Another one, he's up at Walgreens. Sits down at the end of the counter. They had a big long counter. You remember that counter went all the way around, way down at the end of the counter. He's there sipping a cup of coffee. A man walks by him, turns and looks, gets on the other side and looks, and he says, aren't you J. Golden Kimball? And he says, yes, I am. And the man straightens up and he says, I'd rather commit adultery than drink coffee. Golden says, so would I. Ranch Kimball would pick him up and take him on a beautiful day, and when he'd call him ahead and said, let's go have some lunch. I'll fix you some lunch up City Creek Canyon, which was a password that meant they were going to go up City Creek Canyon, and Ranch had some sandwiches, and he was going to fix a fire and put some coffee on there for Golden and himself. And they would often do this. And so they were way up there at the top of City Creek Canyon, all by themselves, with this little fire, and they're drinking 2 tin cups of coffee. And Ranch said, I said to Uncle Golden, does this bother you? I mean, being up here with me, being a general authority and drinking coffee and the two of us, together here like this and violating a basic tenet of the Mormon faith? And Uncle Golden says, no, it doesn't bother me at all. And Ranch said, well, why not? And he said, because the 89th section doesn't apply at this altitude. He stood up in In Las Vegas, Nevada, as I recall, Las Vegas was settled by the Mormons, in case you don't know, and then everything got away from them, is the only way I can. But I think they have 9 or 10 or 11 stakes down there now, but he was assigned to go down there from St. George, and there were some, he was told by the stake president that there were some newspaper reporters there from the newspapers in Las Vegas as well as the newspapers in Los Angeles. They had heard that he was coming and had heard about him, that he was this swearing elder, so they showed up. And the church tried to show respect for them and the free press and the constitutional rights that they enjoyed. And so Golden gets up to speak, and he looks over, and he's been told who they are, and he says, now over here on the front row sit a number of newspaper reporters, and they're going to try and get me to swear because they want to put in their article that I have sworn because they think I'm a swearing elder. And if they put that in their newspaper report that I have sworn, I want them to know they're damn liars. Uncle Golden was a very tall and narrow man, almost stork-like. That's why so many stories relate to his appearance. After I understand you know a delightful story about Uncle Golden, you called and told me over the telephone. Would you tell me that story one more time?
Yes, this was my father who heard him give this. And it was at the time that the LDS Institute in Logan was new. And he went up to hear the Easter sermon. And Jay Golden had been asked to give the Easter sermon. And when Jay Golden got up to speak, he went to the pulpit, and there was this beautiful arrangement of Easter lilies on the pulpit. He looked at the bouquet, and then he looked out at the congregation, and then he looked back at the bouquet, and he picked it up and took it and put it over on the piano. And when he came back, he said in his rather high-pitched speaking voice, "The contrast was too great."
Oh, I love that. And your father was, how old would you say he was when he heard that story?
Oh, he was in his late 20s, I suppose.
Late 20s.
Yes.
And everyone laughed, he said?
Yes, everyone laughed.
Got a big kick out of it.
Yes, and then Dad never forgot it.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, he had to tell us about that several times.
A Thanksgiving turkey. Could you tell me that one more time?
My grandfather, Stephen H. Love, who was president of the Utah Iowa Sugar Company, and Jay Golden Kimball were good friends. My grandpa had an old Franklin car. I don't know whether you remember that or not, but it was an air-conditioned, air-cooled car. Often on Saturdays, they'd go out and cruise nearly every byway and alley in the valley. Anyway, one day when they were out just before Thanksgiving, Jay Golden said to my grandfather, "Steve," he says, "why don't we go out to Brother Clark's farm and get a turkey for Thanksgiving?"
That was J. Reuben Clark.
J. Reuben Clark had a farm out at Stansbury. And among other things, he raised turkeys. So the two of them decided to do that. So they drove out to Stanbury, and each of them got a turkey. And the day after Thanksgiving, my grandfather said to Jay Golden, he said, "Golden, how did you enjoy the turkey we got out at Brother Clark's farm for Thanksgiving?" And Grandpa told me that Golden looked at him and says, "Steve, I sat down with my mouth all set for a turkey dinner. And to my great surprise, Mother served a roast of beef." And I said to her, "Mother, where's that turkey that I bought out at Brother Clark's farm for Thanksgiving?" And she said, "Golden, when I went to get it ready to cook, the long scrawny neck looked so much like yours, I didn't have the heart to cook it."
I love that.
I suppose that's really true because it happened to Grandpa, and I heard him tell that story himself.
That's lovely. That was his wife, Jenny. Couldn't cook the turkey, huh?
Long scrawny neck looked so much like his he couldn't cook it.
Governor Rampton was in his 20s when Golden was in the height of his uninhibited self. And Governor Rampton really cared a great deal for him, as did, strangely enough, John Fitzpatrick, who's the editor of the Tribune. I just learned from a member of his family, would come by and get Golden every week and take him to lunch, because, I mean, here's a Catholic editor of a paper that was extremely critical of the church, and yet he was very close to Jay Golden. His friends were across a broad spectrum. At any rate, Cal Rampton said that, told me this story about 11 years ago, and he said, your Uncle Golden was very sick, and President Grant called him on the phone. He says, we want you to go with us over to Denver to create our first stake in Denver. We have tickets on the Denver Rio Grande. All the general authorities are going. We're going to take a whole car and eat together in the diner, and it's going to be a lovely getaway. And Golden says, well, I'm so sick, I just don't think I can go, Heber. He always called President Grant Heber. Never called him President Grant. They were old friends. Don't be mistaken. They were old friends from way back when President Grant was over in Japan on a mission. The correspondence between those two men is very touchy, great affection for each other. I just don't feel well, Heber, I can't go, I'll get worse. And he says, Golden, listen, just come with us, be along with us. And President Grant knew in the back of his mind that if Golden went with him any place, there was always a crowd. He wrote that in his diary. He says, when I go by myself, only the stake presidency is there to greet me. If I take Golden along, there are throngs of people at the train station. But I don't know whether that was on his agenda or not, but he said, we'd just love to have you come. And Uncle Golden says, okay, if you don't call on me to speak, I'll go, but I can't speak, I'm too sick. So they get on the train, they go over to Denver. They dedicate the stake, they get on the train, they come back. Golden's doing reasonably well. He just wants to go to bed. And President Grant says, oh, come down and join us for dinner. We're just going to have dinner in the diner, please. Golden says, okay, but I don't want to eat anything. So they get down there. And the orders are being taken. And this waiter, this black waiter, comes up to Uncle Golden and says, sir, what would you like for dinner? Well, I don't feel well. I just don't feel well. I'm just going to pass. I think I'm coming down with the flu. Waiter said, sir, if I could make a recommendation to you, he says, I know how to lick the flu. I know how to beat it. Golden says, oh, really? How do you do it? And he says, well, it's really very simple. I get a big tall glass and I fill it half full of whiskey and half full of coffee. And you drink that down and you'll feel just fine when you get up tomorrow morning in Salt Lake City. There's dead silence in the diner. President Grant was... Golden looked around at everyone and he says, oh, I'll have to pass on that. Brother, that's very kind of you, but I'll have to pass. Thank you very much. I'll be okay. Whatever you say, sir. So the black waiter walks down and out of the diner, and he just about gets to the kitchen, and Golden stands and says, oh, waiter, waiter. And he turns around and everyone's watching. He says, about that drink, to make me feel better, you couldn't make that half postum, could you? Now, they said that President Grant lost it. He laughed and laughed, had to take his glasses off. Tears were going down his face. Well, Jens, it's nice of you to join me on this ride in this lovely Model T today.
Well, it's a real nice experience for me too. Thanks for having me along.
I was very interested in having you retell that story of Uncle Golden and the financiers from the East that came out to visit. Could you tell me that one more time?
Oh, that one. Well, Heber J. Grant had some financiers coming out from the East. He was a businessman, you know, and he wanted to show them a good time. And so he called around to try to get one of the general authorities to come and do the tour with these people. And he looked, and lo and behold, they were all busy doing something or other except Jay Golden. And he called up Jay Golden, invited him to come in the office, explained to him that these people were coming, and They needed to see the town, and would he escort them around? And he demurred and said, "Oh, President, you know I am with the language. I don't want to disgrace the church. I'd prefer if you ask somebody else." And Heber J. Grant said, "Well, I've already looked around, and you're the only one we have, so you have to do it." So, under protest, then Jay Golden said he'd show them around town. Eventually, he met up with a group and took them to the McEwen House. And he said, "This is the McEwen House, grand center of the city for doing cultural things, music and dance and that sort of thing. And it took us 4 years to build this place." And there was a wag in the crowd, and he says, "Well, we could have done this in 2 years back east." And that kind of riled Jay Golden. It's obvious these Eastern people didn't understand the difficult circumstances these pioneer people were operating under. Well, next he took them down to the grand city and county building, real classical structure, and he said, "This is where we do our city and state business for the county, and took us 7 years to build this building." And this same wag piped up and says, "Well, we could have built that building in 5 years back east." And that riled up Jay Golden even more. So toward the end of the tour, he was driving up Main Street between what was then Hotel Utah and the temple. And he was just passing the temple, and it was obvious he wasn't going to say anything about it. So the wag spoke up and pointed to the temple and said, "Hey, what's this building here?" And Jay Golden turned around and looked at it and says, "Hell, I don't know, it wasn't there yesterday."
I love it. I love it. Golden always loved to go down 89 because it had so many small rural cities all the way down, and he had many friends. And some of I think the most authentic and delightful stories came from that route, because he was a long ways away from Salt Lake, and he was very spontaneous, especially with the people there. They were just good, hardworking rural saints. Let's open it up, okay? See how fast it goes. One time Golden was speaking down here at a conference, and the stake president took him aside and he said, "In the afternoon session there's going to be some people that aren't active in the church. We call them Latter-day Aints, and they may make some cat calls and have some fun with you." Golden says, "Oh, that doesn't bother me at all." And sure enough, when he got up to speak, they yelled out, "We can't hear you up here." Golden stopped, went on for a little while. They yelled again, "We still can't hear you up here." Stopped and he looked at him and he says, "You know, that's the way it's going to be on the first morning of the resurrection. A bunch of jackasses like you will be over in some corner telling Jesus, 'We can't hear you up here.'" Brought the house down, he said. They loved that story. Uncle Golden was funny. He didn't particularly come down with any prepared text. no sermon in mind. He just waited till he got down to the towns and the small cities and the farms and talked to the people. Found out what was bothering them. Look at their crops, look at their animals. One time he came down old Highway 89 and was in Salina or Richfield through here. Stake president wanted him to give a talk on genealogy. He couldn't talk the stake president out of it. As a matter of fact, when the stake president introduced him, he says, "Brother Kimball will be talking about genealogy." Golden got up and said, "They want me to talk about genealogy. As far as I'm concerned, it's work for the dead done by the half-dead." Well, here we are in Capitol Reef National Park, 12th day of June, 1998, performing J. Golden Kimball for the Entrada fundraiser. It's a beautiful day. It's rained like hell for the last 3 or 4 days. We've faced rain, sleet, hail, and pestilence, and survived them all to be here. Richard and Jan Larson from Richfield, Utah. Is that right? Mm-hmm. And you say that you know a Golden Kimball story you wanted to pass on to me.
The one we have was when he was dressed and ready for church and out feeding the calf. And the calf shook its head and shook milk all over his new suit. And he says, "If I had my way, I'd shove your head right to the bottom of this damn bucket."
Have you ever had that happen to you? Try to feed a calf and have it?
I think that's why we liked it so well.
So much truth to it.
So much truth to it, yeah. It kind of hit home.
Well, thanks very much. I hope you enjoy the program tonight.
Sure we will.
We will.
I'll tell you some more news stories.
Okay.
Okay.
Good.
Thanks for coming. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd never performed on the flatbed of a 1938 Ford truck before. I performed on a hay wagon and one time on a manure spreader, but never on the back of a truck. If there's anyone in this group that doesn't know who J. Golden Kimball is, I mean, would you raise your hands that I could explain to you? Some of you, all right, never heard of him before. The prevailing religion in Utah is the Mormon faith, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And J. Golden Kimball was a general authority, in the ruling body of this church for about 55, 56 years. And the reason he's remembered is not that he was a general authority, but that he was just a rough-hewn old cowboy that they made a general authority. And when they found out what he was really like, it was too late. They couldn't remove him from that position. You understand? They couldn't get any missionaries to go out in some Nevada town. They wouldn't go. They had all these young men. They wouldn't go. And they said, Heber J. Grant says, "Golden, go over and talk to them." Golden always would say that in his diary, he says, "I was the gunslinger for the church. Whenever there was some impossible situation, Heber would send me over." So he went over there, and they finally got one of the wildest, roughest kids in town to go on a mission. And they had a party for him the night before his farewell, and Golden was supposed to speak at the farewell and tell all the other young men what a wonderful thing that this young boy was going. And so he goes to this party, and it turns out to be a really wild party. I mean, there was dancing, but he could tell there was drinking, and they finally asked this young elder who was about to leave to stand up and say a few words, and he was drunker than anybody else there. So he gets up and wanders around and slurs a few sentences out and tells his girlfriend he'll be back in a couple of months to see her, and they can't keep me there, and walks off and falls down, and Golden turned to the bishop after seeing this, and he says, "That young elder you're sending out, I think you ought to keep him around for a little while and kick him in the ass every day, and then he might turn out to be a good elder." They used to send him out during the Depression a great deal of the time. That was a tough time for the church, my friends. That was a really tough time, because people weren't paying their tithing. 10% the Mormons are supposed to pay, and plus fast offerings. It's a very expensive church to belong to. Fast offering and tithing, but we feel that you get blessed for it. So Golden went up and told them they were missing out on a lot of blessings. They weren't sending their sons on missions. They weren't even going to do their temple work because they couldn't afford gas. And so Golden's idea was, yeah, that's fine, but you're in the devil's hands. I mean, this is exactly what the devil wants you to do. So he got up and started preaching this sermon, and he had a roll of paper in his hands. All the time he was preaching, he had this roll of paper in his right hand, and he says, "Brothers and sisters, this is exactly what the devil wants you to do. Not pay your tithing, not send your sons on missions, not to do temple work. Then he has you within his power. And one more step and it's apostasy and you're out of the church. That's the truth. And I'm here to tell you, you've got to change your ways or you're going to go to hell. You're probably wondering what I have in my right hand here. Aren't you curious? I've had it in my right hand the whole meeting long. Well, I'll tell you what it is. It's the Lord's shit list and all your names are on it." Golden went out to set this brother apart, and he was a Central European, and he'd just been converted to the church. And it was in the avenues. Somebody told me this story. I went to a summer party for Golden Gleaners or MN or somebody, and someone came up and says, your Uncle Golden in that ward, the old East 33rd Ward, I think it was, set this man apart. And he says, I was there and I watched him do it. And the man had a peculiar name. His name was Ivanovich Ignatevicius. I remembered that. It's a weird name from Central Europe. You know how they have these names that are all filled with vowels? Well, that's the kind of name he had. And so Uncle Golden said, "Come here, brother, I'll set you apart." He was going to make him an elder. And he put his hands on his head and he says, "Now, what's your name?" And he get the name and lean down. And the brother said, "My name is Ivanovich Ignatevicius." Golden says, "Thank you very much. What was the name again? Could you just repeat that one more time for me?" Because the very first thing you do when you set somebody apart, you give their name. Ivanovich Ignatevicius. Thank you very much. Ivan Yakov. What's one more time, brother? And he said it again. He says, "Oh hell, the Lord knows who you are." He loved to reflect back on these days, and he'd get carried away reflecting back on his days in Round Valley, and he was describing the snow, and somebody said, "Well, we get a lot of deep snow in Salt Lake, Brother Kimball. Was it deeper than Salt Lake snow?" And he says, "Our snow was as high to an Indian, and that's pretty high." I mean, people were just baffled at his the way he described things. He would describe meetings with the brethren as sweeping up mice turds was the phrase he would use, because they got involved in such minutia. His diary constantly makes reference to sweeping up mice turds. And he would often sign his letters, J. Golden Kimball, scapegoat of the church. A woman called me and said that Golden Kimball came over to Nevada, again, sent by President Grant because lightning had hit this barn and completely destroyed the barn, killed all the animals in the barn. And this poor brother in the church was just destitute. And so they sent Golden Kimball over there. Heber J. Grant said, you got to go over and try and help him out because he has nothing. He's lost everything. But unbeknownst to Golden, the neighbors all around the Elko area had taken up a collection prior to the arrival of Golden Kimball, and nobody told Golden that. So he arrives there, and they'd all, you know, these were tough times for them and everybody else. And so they finally said, Brother Kimball has called all the members of the church together, and he would like to talk to us. And so Golden had a cowboy hat, a brand new cowboy hat on, and he took it off and he says, "No, I think we all ought to delve into our pockets and help this brother out because he's destitute." And he handed his hat and he went around the room. And when it came back, it was empty. He looked in it and he put it on and went home. And when he got back to Salt Lake, this woman who was his secretary said, "Well, how did that meeting go over there for you?" And he says, "It was a damn failure." He says, "I was just grateful to get my hat back." Okay, the next story is probably, of all the stories I've heard about Uncle Golden, this ranks right up there as probably one of the most incredible stories. And yet it shows again how uninhibited he was and how quick his wit was. This story was told to me again by another general authority who attended the meeting where this incident took place. So we have it from a very good general authority, a reliable source. Years ago, many of you would remember, the church had steak farms. When I was a young boy, we often would get up at 4 o'clock and go out and pick apples on the steak farm. Maybe some of you had those kinds of experiences, but it was a very common thing. They don't do it anymore because the church has, I guess the church is is the largest holder of farms and livestock in the United States today, and that keeps the welfare system well supplied with those kinds of services and goods, and so they don't need these steak farms. But in those days when they did, they would often ask Golden, because he was a cowboy and he was a rancher and he was a farmer, to go out and look at these ranches or farms they were going to purchase. And so Heber J. Grant, in a welfare meeting, turned to Golden and says, "Golden, there's a ranch down near Salina. We want you to go down and take a look at it. The stake down there is thinking of buying it. It's about 225 acres. We want you to report back to our next meeting next week. Would you go down and take a look at it and tell us what you think of it?" So Golden says, "I'll be happy to do it, Heber." So he gets in his Model T. He drives all the way down 89. They show him this piece of ground. He makes notes on it. He goes back to the meeting, and next week, Heber J. Grant calls the welfare meeting, and he's going down this list of things to discuss, and he gets to Brother Kimball, and he says, "Now, Brother Kimball, would you please stand up and tell us about this farm or ranch you looked at down near San Pete, in San Pete County, and tell us what you think of it?" And Golden says, "I'd be happy to, Heber." It was a little more than 222 acres, and the price on it was $125,000. It was, I thought, a good price. He said it had a nice slope to it. He said you could raise alfalfa on the bottom half of it. It's fenced. You get about 4 or 5 cuts of alfalfa a year. And he said you could run cattle on the top of it, a lot of good feed up there. And he says, I think it'd be I'd recommend. And President Grant said, "Brother Kimball, before you make any recommendations, was there any water on it?" And he said, "Yes." He says, there's a small stream that runs down the south fence line. And President Grant says, "How big is it?" And he says, "Well, it wasn't much of a stream at all. Maybe, 2 or 3 second feet." And they said, "We don't understand. How big was it?" And Golden says, "Well, I could piss about halfway across it." And President Grant said, "Brother Kimball, you were out of order." And he says, "Yes, and if I weren't, I could have pissed all the way across it." Oh. Okay, you all know where Spring City is. You've all been there. Spring City, up 89, just off to the right below, what's the city? Mount Pleasant, just below Mount Pleasant. 10 miles from Mount Pleasant is Spring City. Lovely place, lovely place. Not much of a commercial area, but some beautiful homes being restored there. Okay, this again is another one of those stories that, I don't know where you heard this, sister, but I couldn't believe it when I first heard it. A woman called into KUED and said, when we did the first tape of Remembering Uncle Golden, she said, I want to talk to Kimball. I'll make a pledge, but I want to talk to Kimball. She's 87, and this happened to her when she was 17. She remembered this story, and she told me on the telephone this story that night in the studio. She says, you want to talk to me? And so I said, well, what's the story? And this is what the story was. She said that we had a peculiar situation here in Spring City because she said we had a bishop that was a very mild, reserved, quiet, gentlemanly kind of fellow. And she said, and we had a very aggressive Relief Society president, Sister Rasmussen, extremely aggressive, very assertive. And she essentially was running the ward, Brother Kimball, and it wasn't right. I mean, she was telling him who was paying a full tithing and who should be called on missions, what missionaries shouldn't be going because they were fornicators and they smoked, and who should not be called to serve in the Sunday school because they had never returned the tools they had borrowed from their neighbor. And it went on like this, and the poor bishop was just overwhelmed by it. And so these people, she said, started to write President Grant and say, send somebody down to fix this problem. This sister's running the ward and it's not right. So Heber called in Golden and said, could you go down? And here's all these stack of letters, read them and go down and solve this problem. In those days, that was a common thing for the brethren to do, was to get in their cars and go solve problems and stay with the members. And so they went, he read all the letters and got in his Tin Lizzie and he drove down and he got to Spring City and he interviewed the bishop and he interviewed Sister Rasmussen. And then he said, went back to the bishop and he says, could I have just a few minutes in sacrament meeting, would you mind? The bishop said, no, we'll give you any time you want. And so sacrament meeting went as usual, and then Golden was called upon and he got up. And she said, this is what he said. He grabbed the pulpit and he says, brothers and sisters, I'm happy to be with you. I want to ask you all a question. How many of you have ever had a sliver in your ass? Would you please show by a raise of hands? How many of you have ever had a sliver in your ass? And she said, I had one as a young girl. I'd slid down the slippery slide and got one. And so I raised my hand and slowly people started to raise your hand. He says, good. You know how it feels. You can't exactly tell where it is or which way it's headed or how to get it out. And so you need somebody to help you, don't you? Well, that's why I'm here. You have a sliver in your ass, brothers and sisters, and I'm here to help you take it out. Now, all who can release Sister Rasmussen as a Relief Society president, would you do so by the usual show of sign? Is there any opposed? Thank you. It's a beautiful morning. The day after a storm is always the most beautiful. I'm sure Uncle Golden must have felt just as I'm feeling now. What a lovely time it is in the spring in rural Utah. It was in this home in Kanosh, Utah that my grandfather and grandmother lived most of their married lives. Lon and Jane Kimball raised all their family here. He was a cattleman, a Mormon bishop, and he was also the Indian agent to the Kanosh Indians who lived in the mountains east of Kanosh. And grandmother told me a story about their favorite visitor, who was Uncle Golden. He would often stop here overnight and stay for dinner, then go on the next morning in his Model T as he traveled south for the church in one assignment or another. And grandmother said he would always time it to be here, particularly when the peaches were on. She had several peach trees in the back, and his timing was always perfect, and he'd fill his cowboy hat with peaches and always enjoyed the stay. She told me that at dinner one night, the conversation centered around Lon's responsibility as the Indian agent, and the conversation from the boys and from her at the table was how much they loved him, how much they thought of him, and how he was always an intermediary for them with the white man. They loved him so much, she said, that many of the papooses were being named after him. Every time a new papoose was born, they named him Lon Kimball, and then the Indian name. And Uncle Golden just sat there and listened to the conversation. He didn't say much. But grandmother said the next morning when he left, he had his peaches in his hat in his right hand, and as they walked out this pathway, he put his arm around Jane and said, "Well now, Jane, I want you to know how much I've enjoyed being here. Always enjoy the food and the company, but in that conversation last night, the statement about all the papooses being named after Lon because all the Indians loved him so much. Now, Jane, are you sure that's the only reason all those papooses are being named after him?" The heat bothered Uncle Golden a great deal. He would often lament having to go to St. George in the summer months. He always said Heber Grant got to go down there in January and February, and he only got to go there in July and August. But he loved those people down there, particularly the people in St. George, because he always enjoyed kidding them about living in what he called this hell, this unbearable hell. Tonight, I'm going to perform at the St. George Opera House. My good friends Sherry and Ralph Atkin arranged a lovely reception for our audience. You know that, don't you? Yeah.
Even the mayor and his father were there.
Oh, well, I've got some new ones for you tonight.
My mother Denise.
Like
My dad used to tell me some of them.
Oh, did he?
He remembered several of them.
Can you remember any of them tonight?
Well, I don't know.
You think about it.
He will. That's got to marry, don't quit.
It'll come to him.
He might have the wrong emphasis and the wrong syllable, but it'll be there.
I remember your story about coming to Dixie.
Yeah.
And the brethren said, you've got to go back down and apologize to those people for what you said.
I use that story.
So he came back down and he said, the brethren said, I've got to apologize to you because I said if I had a home in St. George, one in hell, he said, sell me one in St. George and go to hell. And he said, I'm apologizing, but it's still the truth.
Yeah.
We had a grandfather that lived to be 103.
103?
Uh-huh. And he was a good friend of Jay Golden.
Of Jay Golden's.
And he came down one time and he said, well, Charlie, won't be long now till we go find out how all this stuff we've been preaching all these years is true.
Won't be long.
Now, Charlie was...
Charles W. Segmiller.
Segmiller, Charlie Segmiller. Well, I'll be.
Oh, I listen to you on television, and that's someone I know. And I had one story of my great-grandfather's.
Yes.
My grandfather's. He was a judge here.
Right.
And I'm sure it's one you've heard a million times.
Oh, you tell me. You tell me anyway.
It was in the days when they used to hold all their bodies still. A general authority came down if it was, and then they'd all go down in the tabernacle. And he preached the servants told them about 15 times what a wonderful woman this was. She had done so much for the community, and they kept pulling his coattail and poking him, and they said, what's a man? And he turned around and said, who in the hell's funeral is this anyway? And they said he gave the best funeral service they'd ever had in St. George afterwards.
So he thought it was a man and it was a woman that had died.
That, yeah,
I love
I've
it.
heard your grandpa tell that. He used to be real chummy with
I
Heber
see.
J. Grant, and I don't think President Grant was noted for his sense of humor.
No, that was not one of his strengths. He had a lot of strengths,
That wasn't it.
but he and Golden were almost a perfect combination because
That's why I know he
a
got,
straight man and a jokester.
and that's where he got such a kick out of this story. Every year he won the same story. And so I thought, when they talked about it, I said, well, I imagine you have that story, but I had to tell it to you anyway.
Well, I'm glad you did. I'm glad you did. Last Christmas, I went down to the old Devereaux House in Salt Lake City. Devereaux House is now a restaurant, and people were having a Christmas party, and they asked me to come down and tell some Golden Kimball stories, which I was happy to do. And for me, it is a great experience because oftentimes I will hear stories. I'm collecting all these stories, and that night I really struck a gold lode because this man came up afterwards and said, "Your Uncle Golden was on his phone one day in his office, and I was there. I was supposed to be set apart to go on a mission, and he said I was really looking forward to being set apart by your Uncle Golden. And someone from a national wire service called on the telephone and said, there is a rumor in the East that the Mormons are preparing for the second coming." And Golden, he says, I could hear both sides of the conversation. And Uncle Golden says, "Yes, we do believe in the second coming." And he says, and further, to add to that rumor, we believe it is understood that this angel Moroni on the top of your temples will blow his horn when the second coming begins. And on all your temples all over the world, this horn will be blown, and the Mormons will then gather back in Salt Lake City and begin to move back to Missouri. And Golden Kimball says, "No, you got it all wrong. No truth to that at all." He says, if the angel Moroni on the Salt Lake Temple were to blow his horn, he'd blow pigeon shit over to the east buildings of East South Temple, and we can't have that. And hung up the phone. I mean, Uncle Golden had no time for the Eastern press. Somebody told me, Brother Whitehead, that this took place in Cedar City, and I don't know if anybody can authenticate this, but in Cedar City, they were going to do a broadcast that included the cities to the north and St. George and Las Vegas, and all the saints were by their radios, and it was a problem with the FCC, and they had to watch Golden because the FCC could take away your license, and the church just barely obtained their license to broadcast. And so President Grant called Golden in and said, "Golden, I've prepared some notes for you. This is going to be the talk you're going to give when you go with me to Cedar City. Do you understand?" And Golden says, "Well, I'll do my best." And so they get down to Cedar City, and the broadcast begins, and President Grant speaks, and then he says, "I'd now like to hear from the president of the First Quorum of 70, J. Golden Kimball." And Golden gets up, takes the speech out, and, "Dear brothers and sisters, it is a great privilege to be with you today." Stumbled along for a few lines, and finally he just stopped and says, "Hell, Heber, I can't read this damn thing." I'm standing in front of the famous tabernacle in St. George. This building was begun in about midway through the Civil War and finished in 1871. It's probably one of the last remaining great tabernacles in the West. Many of them have fallen into disuse and condemned and torn down. This wonderful building remains. It's famous for a lot of things, but the story that, to me, it is most famous for occurred about 75 years ago when two men came down this street, walked up this sidewalk into this building, up these stairs. They were President Heber J. Grant of the Mormon Church and Elder J. Golden Kimball of the First Council of 70. Golden Kimball was attending this particular conference with Heber J. Grant because President Grant requested it of him. By this time, Golden's stories and language had become so offensive to President Grant that he demanded that Golden travel with him and speak where he spoke. President Grant on this particular day chose to speak from a favorite text of his, which was that which we persist in doing, not that the nature of the thing changes, but our ability to overcome it is increased. And he cited as an example his inability to sing as a young man, and the difficulty he encountered, and how he practiced and took lessons, and finally developed a really fine singing voice. And to prove his point, he sang one verse from one of his favorite patriotic hymns, "The Flag Without a Stain." And then he sat down. And then Elder J. Golden Kimball stood before the congregation. He cleared his voice and he says, "Brothers and sisters, I have to admire Heber's ability to persist and overcome his limitations, but after listening to him sing, I still think he sounds like hell." The man that posed the biggest problem for Uncle Golden, and this is a story that President Spencer W. Kimball told at a Kimball family reunion. He told two stories about Uncle Golden. See, the Kimball family reunions are always kind of an out-of-control situation because I've got like 3,000 cousins, and Heber C. Kimball had 43 wives, 66 children, 42 sons, and the rest daughters, and a number of twins. It was a very big family. It's completely out of control. And there's no place big enough for us to hold a meeting anymore. Francis Lyman would often pick either B.H. Roberts or Uncle Golden to travel with him. And again, we had a situation where Francis Lyman talked way too much, a member of the Quorum of the 12. And it seemed to drive B.H. and Uncle Golden crazy, and they'd try to pass it back and forth because he'd either take the senior member of the First Quorum of 70 or the next senior member. And Golden said in his diary that he would get even with Brother Lyman because he would snore all night. And even though Brother Lyman would talk all day, he would snore all night. So Uncle Golden said that they canceled each other out in his mind. And but Golden found that Brother Lyman was very, very bothered because he couldn't get a good night's sleep. In those days, they slept in the same bedroom in the same house of members. It's very different than it is today. But Brother Lyman, on a train in Texas, woke Golden up one night. They were in the same berth, and he says, "Brother Kimball, could you wake up?" And Uncle Golden said, "Yes, what do you want?" And he says, "I stopped off at a hardware store today, and I was wondering, you're snoring again, and I can't sleep, and we've got to solve this problem. And here's some masking tape. Here's some duct tape that which preceded duct tape." And he says, "I bought a big roll of this, and I'm going to tear off a piece, and I was wondering if you'd wear it at night so I could get some sleep." And Uncle Golden leaned up on his pillow and says, "I'll make you a deal. I'll wear it at night, you wear it in the daytime." But B.H. Roberts was in a similar disposition about speaking, because he would take Golden with him, and he would give orations for hours. He would debate people on Temple Square. They'd bring ministers in on the train from the east, and they'd debate about some aspect of Mormon theology. My dad said people used to stand in line around Temple Square for hours to get in to hear these debates. They don't do it anymore, but it was a great era of debate and dialogue in the church. And B.H. Roberts, of course, would forget time and go on and on and on. And one evening, just to tell you about some of the dilemmas that Uncle Golden had in being around these great orators. B.H. Roberts, they were in Pennsylvania, and B.H. Roberts went on, and finally he got to the end, and he turned around and he said, "Now, Brother Kimball, have I forgotten to tell these people anything?" And Golden jumped right up and he says, "Yeah, B.H., you forgot to tell them that when you die, I'll be the senior member of the First Quorum of 70." That is Elder Marion DeHank's favorite story. And I think it's because he was on the First Quorum of 70 for so many years. But the other story that President Kimball loves to tell, which I found extremely humorous, was at a family reunion after Ranch Kimball died. Ranch Kimball would tell jokes, J. Golden Kimball jokes, and do magician tricks at the Kimball family reunions, and then President Kimball would stand up and try and swing us back into a more spiritual mode. And sometimes he'd succeed, and sometimes he wouldn't. And so when Ranch died, then President Kimball felt obliged to tell a few Golden Kimball stories. And that's how these stories came to me, because I would always go. That story was told at a Kimball family reunion. The other story is that President Kimball said that prior to being a stake president, in Thatcher, Arizona, that a little convert, a Jewish German convert to the church, a man about 70 years old named Heinz, finally, after many, many years of studying the gospel, said, "I want to be a member of your church, but Golden Kimball has to baptize me." So they wrote Brother Kimball a letter and said, "Will you come down and baptize this little man?" And Golden knew who he was. Again, in those days, the brethren were called on to do these kinds of things. They were only too happy to do it. They had the time. There weren't 10 million members. It's a very different church today. There's probably 250,000 members. So Golden goes down, and President Kimball said that they went out to this grove of poplar trees where there was a stream. It was a spring runoff, and there was more than a current in the stream. But he says it was a beautiful spot, and the trees were just coming out. And he says, we all gathered around on the bank, all the people from Thatcher, to watch Golden take this little German down into the waters of baptism. And he took him down, and he said the baptismal prayer, and he dropped him into the water, and the current caught the little German, and Golden raised up his hands. And he said, "Damn, I lost him." And President Kimball said people jumped in the stream, I mean women and men fully clothed, and dived in, and they found him, spurting water like a whale about 10 yards down the stream, and he never forgot his baptism. President Kimball said he never forgot that experience. While I was in St. George, I met with retired anesthesiologist Lawrence Reichman. Well, Lawrence, thanks for meeting us here in St. George today, the city of your youth.
And birth.
And birth. And calling me on the phone and telling me the J. Golden Kimball story that you heard from your grandfather.
Well, this grandfather was named Mitt Moody. He'd been a cowboy, a forest ranger, and sometimes I think he embellished the stories a little bit.
Yeah, we all do that.
And he said that this occurred during one of the state conferences in St. George, which was in the heat time. And there was no air conditioning of any kind in those days. The morning session went just fine.
This was on a Saturday?
On a Sunday.
A Sunday, okay.
On a Sunday. And it went just fine, no problem. And then in the 2 o'clock when it came, there were not as many people that had been to the morning session. And Jake Golden asked the local authority, said, where's all the people? Is it just too hot? And he said to Jay Golden, he said, no, there's a very important baseball game going on out at the ballpark. Brother Kimball got up and said, we're going to dismiss from here and we'll meet out at the ballpark. And that's about a 4-block walk. He walks into this park here.
With all the congregation
following
him over.
Following him over.
Uh-huh.
They went up into the bleachers. Jay Golden went to the umpire and said, "I'm taking over this game." Hey, I don't recall whether Grandpa said it was at the pitcher's mound or the home plate.
Uh-huh.
He stood out there and gave his sermon. And he said, when he got through, he said, "In the name of Jesus Christ, amen, play ball." And went up into the stand.
And watch the game.
Watch the game.
That's a great story. And and everyone was. I mean, what was the people's reaction?
I think some were stunned.
Uh-huh.
Some were pleased, and I think many were excited.
Well, that's
My
amazing.
grandfather said he was excited.
Did they cheer? Did they laugh?
They cheered, laughed.
Every emotion.
Right.
That's a lovely story. I love that. Sounds just like Golden. Very spontaneous, free-spirited, understood the people, took the mountain to Mohammed.
Right.
Yeah.
And see, my grandfather was one of those.
Yeah. Yeah.
He could say a few words like Jay Golden could.
So he could relate to him.
Very much.
Okay, I'll tell you two stories about the great senator and apostle, Reed Smoot. There was only one man in the history of the Mormon Church who was a United States senator and an apostle of the Lord at the same time, and that was Reed Smoot. And Golden liked Reed, and they had a kind of an off-again, on-again relationship. But both of these stories came from the Smoot family to me. And it's interesting that they would come to that side of the family because they're really quite insightful. Reed Smoot, when they made him a member of the Quorum of the 12, Golden saw him in the halls of the church office building, and Reed went up and said, "Golden, how are you?" And Golden says, "Well, I'm fine. I understand they've made you an apostle of the Lord now." And Reed said, "Yes, they have." And Golden says, "Well," he says, "I want you to know, Reed, I respect you and I love you, but you were truly called of God because nobody else would have thought of you." And then Reed Smoot later lost his wife. He was in Washington. He was a great senator. Smoot Hawley Tariff, I mean, some of the legislation he put on the books is still there today. I mean, he was a powerful man and well respected. But his family said that when he lost his wife after an appropriate period of time, he began to ask some young ladies out, some sisters, and he met Alice Sheets and fell in love with her, and he said, "I would like you to marry me," and Alice said, "I'd be happy to marry you." I mean, there was some difference in their ages, but Alice said, "I think it would be wonderful." So Reed gets on the train and comes all the way back to Salt Lake to meet with the brethren and ask them if that which he intends to do has their approval, and they said, "Oh yes." President Grant said, "That'll be wonderful. She'll be a great companion for you, even though there is this age difference. It'll be a happy marriage, and we give you our complete endorsement." And everybody was very encouraging to him. And he meets Golden on the front steps of the church office building. And Reed says, "I guess you've heard about my plans to remarry." And Golden says, "Yes, I did, Reed." He says, "Do I have your blessing?" "No, of course you do, Reed. But you know, Reed, you and I are old men, or we soon will be, and Sister Sheets is just a young woman, and I don't know, Reed, I don't know. I think on the wedding night she's going to expect just a little bit more than the laying on of hands." Joe Carling was a young man in Fillmore, Utah, and he told me this story. He said that the young men in Fillmore, Utah, and the young women go through various phases of wildness and obedience. I mean, it was just kind of a cyclical thing, you know, depending on whom they were looking up to and who was in charge and what kind of examples they were following. He said, the class that I was in was particularly wild. He says they were drinking outhouse whiskey and a lot of teenage pregnancies, and the smoking was starting, and that was getting to be a fad, and the brethren were very concerned. And the brethren called up President Grant again, and he sent Golden down.
Yes, I remember that well. The story doesn't begin here, it begins over in Holden at a quarterly conference of the LDS Church in a room about as big as this, and with benches and chairs with a stage up in the front, and all the dignitaries of the state, and Brother Kimball was speaking at the lectern, and some of the other speakers had been talking about the young people and their carryings on and all that, and I guess Brother Kimball didn't think that same way. He was talking too. He said, well, brothers and sisters, you don't need to worry about these young people. He says, they're all right, they'll take care of themselves. It's these old bald-headed bastards on the front row you want to look out for. And boy, wow, did that, it just erupted, I'll tell you. And I never heard such laughter, and I was surprised, and I think that is one thing that only thing I can remember of that conference.
I'll tell you a story about Rudger Clausen. Rudger Clausen was the president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. And Rudger Clausen would have been the prophet, seer, and revelator, except that Heber J. Grant outlived him. So Rudger Clausen was often assigned to travel with Uncle Golden. And this was a difficult situation for Uncle Golden because Rudger was a man with a very limited sense of humor. And he told this same story about this tragic experience he had in the southern states in 1878 in Varnell Station, Whitfield County, Georgia, on the 21st of July, 1787. Rudger Clausen and his companion, Joseph Standing, were tracting through an area of the rural South, and a mob of men, about a dozen men, surrounded them and said, we're going to take you in the woods and we're going to beat you, which was a very common thing for Mormon missionaries in the southern states. And so they took them into the woods, and Joseph Standing foolishly resisted them and began to push them back and say, leave me alone, leave us alone. And they shot him right in the face, killed him instantly. And the leader of the mob said, shoot the other one. And Rudger Clausen stood there and folded his arms and said, go ahead and shoot. And this unnerved the gang as well as the leader, and they rode off. And it was a very dramatic thing, and Rudger went off and found some friends that were sympathetic with the Mormons, and they came back, and poor Brother Standing's body was riddled with bullets. They'd all come back and shot at him, so they were all mutually guilty of the death of a Mormon missionary. They were later found innocent in a sham of a trial, and Rudger went back and testified, and he was advised to get out of the country or they would kill him. So he did. But this became a great epic moment in Rudger's life, and he would tell this story time and time again. And Golden heard the story, and as Rudger grew older, the story became more and more embellished, and instead of a mob of 12, it was a mob of 51. And it was never ending. And so Golden would go with Rudger to these conferences and never have the chance to be called on to speak, because Rudger took up an hour and 45 minutes and telling this story. And it got to be a little humorous because Golden knew what to expect. And sometimes Golden would just be asked to give the closing prayer. And he'd travel all the way to California and give the closing prayer and come back. And he would, that's a waste of my time, he said. But a brother called me and said that his father had had been in Idaho, and Rutger and Golden were there together, and Rutger did what he traditionally did. And after the meeting, as Golden was coming out and just kind of walking slowly with his head down, he said, my father went up to him and said, Golden, I'm sorry we didn't get to hear from you. We had come so far to hear you speak, and we're sorry about that. Golden says, well, that's very kind of you to say that. And he says, aren't you getting just a little bit tired of hearing this story the same time over and over again? And he says, Uncle Golden says, yeah, I am. And the more I think about it, I feel they shot the wrong man. Oh. Well, there's another aspect of Uncle Golden that I think needs to be understood, and that is these lines came from an English playwright named W.H. Auden, A-U-D-E-N. I read this some time ago and I thought, my gosh, that's true. Auden said this, he said, those that I like and admire, I can find no common denominator. But those that I love, I can. They all make me laugh. This is a Model T Ford road
touring car.
This is a 1912 Ford Model T. Beautiful, isn't it? My Uncle Golden why don't I try and get this thing started? Why don't I try and get this thing started? So join me as I go on the road with J. Golden Kimball. So join me, will you, as I go on the road with J. Golden Kimball. Whoa! This is a new one. I'm sorry, I should have, I made that transition so subtly. Will you forgive me for that? Okay. Do I get any dinner tonight? That's out, huh?
Local production of On the Road with J. Golden Kimball is made possible by a generous grant from the George S. and Dolores Doré Eccles Foundation.